Hello everyone, this is Amir from Audio Science Review. I did a review of a cable from a company called GR Research a few months ago, and the company recently posted a video responding to that, and I made a number of points, and I thought I'd do a video and address them. In that video, I wore a special shirt from NASA that says, Earth is not flat. We've been up there and we've seen it. The reason I wear that is because the company founder, Danny, used to wear that t-shirt all the time and say anybody that followed audio science must believe that the Earth is flat, and he would wear this t-shirt, which made no sense. Thankfully, he doesn't do that anymore. Anyway, he produced this 40-minute video, and I originally wasn't going to respond to it because there's hardly anything of substance in his video, but some of the members asked that I respond to it, and I decided that I should go ahead and do that. And so I marked this for entertainment. I'm not sure that there is a whole lot of technical knowledge being imparted. That's certainly not in his video, but maybe you get a few things out of it. And looks like I couldn't spell my own name on top of that, so you get to decide the value of this video. Anyway, so let me just summarize this cable, this B24 cable. So power cable has been set to use it with your source components. So I used it for a preamplifier. Just summarizing the issues that I found was that it has no safety certification. You buy even a $1 power cable and it will have UL or CE certification. There's none here, and that's a big major issue. It's got a poor design, and it's got this sleeve on it that as you try to plug it in, the sleeve slides forward and makes you think that you actually plugged it in when you haven't, and that is complicated by the fact that the pins on this plug that he's got are too thick. The ground pin is too wide to fit even in my industrial trip-light power strip that I use, and I had to force it with such energy that this slid forward, and the company says this was glued. I don't know how you glue shrink wrap with here or whatever is inside of it. Either way, I've seen and own premium power cables. None of them have this kind of hokey sleeve on them. On this thing, knowing that I would get pushback from him and others on how I was reviewing this cable, I did not lead with measurements. I actually led with a null test of music. So I took music, captured it with a cheap, thin, long, throwaway AC cord, and then I captured it with this cable. And as you'll see, and I'll review again, that there is no difference between the two. Measurements proved the same thing, that the audio waveforms coming out of the preamp that I was testing did not change one iota. There were two positives. It did have slightly lower resistance than the other two premium cables, and certainly from the thin cable, but the difference was extremely minimal as far as the impact it has, and I'll get into that. And I measured that it is more immune to noise, but I'll again explain why that's not material. If you watch the company's video, he makes a number of claims, but then he also goes in the comments and exaggerates some of those claims and adds to them. I'll be going through all of this thing. You could just sort of glance at it, but it's ambiguous what he's saying half the time. Like he says noise is reduced, noise in what direction? If noise going into an AC cable, why do I care about noise going into an AC cable, for example? It's not carrying musical signal. It was a noise going out. So not very precise, and that, any improvements that this cable makes can't be measured. And interesting enough, he makes it a given that he makes an audible difference. Therefore, anything that you say that would invalidate that would say that what you're saying is wrong. So if you say, look, why can't I measure this thing? He says, well, your measurements are wrong because I know that there's audible difference. So if your measurement doesn't show it, that's your problem, not mine, which is kind of silly. He also claims that when people ask him to do a blind test in the comments, he says, oh, I've passed hundreds of them. He's passed hundreds of them, but we don't have a single one of them showing this power cable making a difference, and importantly, what protocol is used in that blind test. So it starts off with saying, I have an agenda. I told him in my comment in there, it's kind of silly to make that point. You have an agenda. You're selling a cable and you're patting yourself on the back that you're the expert and you have golden ears and that you think, it makes a difference. Like, don't bring agenda into this discussion because, you have a serious agenda. On my part, I showed the good with the bad. I didn't have to do that. I could have just ignored some of the good things it does with noise reduction and lower resistance, but I did. And the difference between two of us is that, I'm not here to make a living off of this gig. There are no ads for this video. There's no sponsorships. There's nothing on Audio Science Review either on this thing. So, but put all that aside, everything I do, people can replicate and confirm. Unlike his claims, we can't, he says, I hear the difference. Well, great, we don't know how to confirm that. But with mine, when I show null tests and measurements, everybody can confirm my stuff. And if I keep, cooking these things, people will find out that I'm cooking them and I'll be out of business, literally speaking, in this thing. So, there's a big difference there. Anyway, first thing starts with, hey, you need 200-hour break-in. How stupid of Amir to not do the 200-hour break-in. And my first answer to that is, where did 200 come from? Why isn't it 150? Why is it 180, 300, 500? Where did that number come from? It's a very specific number, which means it was measured. If it's measured, tell us how it was measured. How did you determine that 200 hours something magic happened, or even close to it? Well, why isn't it 50 hours or 10 hours? Nothing like that was provided, other than just declaring that you need 200 hours. Key thing to understand is that AC cables don't carry your music. So while some people claim, things happen to your interconnects and speaker cables, well, none of that matters for a power cable. Power cable just carries raw power, and it's pretty dirty coming out of your wall. And, what are you doing with forming the insulator or whatever people claim on this thing? One big disappointment for me personally was that he showed what's inside the cable, and it's just this thick rope and this jacket, which means 95% of what you think you're buying is actually not wire. The wire is actually much thinner and wrapped around this rope. So you're paying for a thick rope with some wire wrapped around it on this thing. So you can go make your own then, just buy some rope and wrap the wire around it with this jacket around it. But it's very typical of how everybody thinks they should make. All these companies that sell premium cables think the thicker the better, and it is. People just intuitively think, it must be a better cable, so they put a thick rope in the middle. Anyway, if this is required, how come there are people praising the cable as soon as they get it? They said it sound improving. Somebody said that in the comments. Why doesn't he complain and say, well, you didn't break it in, so what you heard was invalid. You got to let it go for 200 hours. What if at 200 hours it gets worse, not better? And then finally, if it needs 200 hours, you do it. You're charging me $400 for this cable. You burn it in for a week. Whatever needs to happen, you do it. If you need to run over with the tank, run over with the tank. Don't make it my problem to go do this. I expect you to sell me what you advertise to be, which is it sounds great. So, you should do that. Okay. He then claims the only bit of technical that he brings to this 40-minute video is this test that actually turned out to be incomplete. He says you can't null noise, but my null test the purpose wasn't to show that noise had changed, although if it had, you could have seen that, but that the music itself had not changed. A lot of people get these things because, say, the bass is tighter, the soundstage wider, deeper. For all those things to happen, the musical signal needs to change. The way we detect depth is based on sound intensity and timing difference between what our two ears pick up, and that for the musical content has to change for the two ears to hear something different and have a perception of soundstage changing. And so that was my null test, and I'll show you in a second what the null test showed, and was that the musical content did not change. If you want to claim that the noise level went down, great, that's a different story. But let's continue with the test he ran. To prove his point that no, you can't null test, excuse me, he goes in his room and points a microphone to the capturing the noises in his room. Excuse me. And he takes a snapshot, freezes it in green, and then he runs another one, freezes it in white, and he says, look, if I subtract one from the other, noise wouldn't be reduced. Well, first, he doesn't do the subtraction. It's like, you're going to do a null test, do a null test. Show us that the subtraction didn't do anything. If he had done it, he actually would have noticed that it will actually do some noise reduction. Why does it do noise reduction? Because if you look at in here, first, the spectrum of noise is not flat. It raises in low frequencies and it goes down in higher frequencies. That's because low frequencies can't be blocked easily. They're omnidirectional, they travel far, they go through walls and floors and so forth. And unlike electronic noise, which tends to be quite random and quite wide spectrum, on this thing. So, the more important thing is that if you actually look in here, you see specific events happening in here. It's not a random thing. This spike is there in both instances on this thing. The reason for that is that we call this correlated noise. A lot of noise like this is coming maybe from a compressor for an air conditioner that's traveling through, and that motor's spinning at a certain frequency. It actually generates what we think is noise, but when you analyze it with a spectrum, you actually see that it's got a pattern to it that has to do with the motor design and everything. And and that's what noise-canceling headphones search for and reduce the level in. That's how noise-canceling headphone works. It takes advantage of correlation in noise and reduces it. By his claim, noise-canceling headphones wouldn't work because you can't reduce noise. And indeed, that's what noise-canceling headphones do. They detect a pattern and make an inverse signal and subtract it, and you get a noise reduction in there. So the whole test in here was bogus. It was like, smoke and mirrors designed to say, I know something about something, but completely wrong domain. You don't use acoustic noise as an example of noise cancellation. Where noise cancellation does work, you want to use electronic products. Go ahead and test the audio product with the two cables and then show us the spectrum difference in noise. You claim noise is reduced. Okay, plug in the two cables. If you have instrumentation, show us the noise before and after, and then we'll be convinced. Look at my null test on this Vivaldi track, and look at the difference between the two. It's pure noise at extremely low levels over here. And this is well below 16 bits. You can see 93.5 dB null, and it's just pure noise. If you click on these things, you won't even hear it unless you have a very high gain preamp. This proves that there's nothing that's happened in the music itself, and this is what the kind of test you run. If you're going to claim sound stage has changed and all these other benefits, you got to do a proper test, and this is a proper test of AB of two cables. It is not an AB of a microphone noise before and after in his room, which has nothing to do with anything. Okay, he then goes into this whole, patting himself on his back. You need to have the right system to hear this, and like mine, where you have expensive speakers moved away from the walls and all this stuff. I'm like, well, if those are the requirements, why don't you put that in the brochure or website saying that, hey, you don't have this kind of system, don't buy this. If you're not using my speakers, don't buy them. If you're not going to put them away from the walls, don't buy it. None of that is in there. Indeed, people claim to plug it into any old system, any crappy system, or good or bad or different, and they'll hear differences. So therefore, his claim that you need these systems is wrong, or these people are wrong that they say they hear a difference. And then he makes fun of me using headphones to hear differences. Well, I needed to use headphones because I wanted to hear that noise that I just showed you in here. And it's extremely low level. To hear that noise, you put a sealed headphone on your head, and then use a headphone amp with a lot of gain that is extremely low noise itself, and then you crank it up, and what I hear is just exactly what I described, which is just background noise that's extremely low level, that is definitely not audible at normal levels. He claims headphones are no good. It's like, well, then you haven't read a single piece of research paper. Every lossy audio codec, many DSP algorithms, even acoustic research is done with headphones because they block the noise, let you listen at much higher level, and get sort of acoustic crosstalk. So each headphone brings one signal to each ear on this thing. No, it's not good to detect there's a sound stage difference or whatever. In a classical sense, you use speakers for that. But for that, I use a null test, and I showed that the musical signal had not changed on this thing. Okay. Then he jumps on the fact that I did show that there's less noise being induced into the cable. And the way I induce cable is that I took a giant transformer that comes with my stack, with my headphone measurement system, and I got that aligned perfectly right next to the cable. And then I measured the cable as an interconnect. So it was hooked up to the input and output of my audio precision analyzer. And then I compared his cable against this generic thin cable that I was doing. And indeed, his cable picks up less noise from that transformer that's generating this huge magnetic field right next to the worst case situation. And I show the difference. So yes, there's something to the geometry of that cable versus the generic one that picks up less noise. But we got to put that in context. And in context, here's this green graph, which he didn't understand or ignored, which is showing the threshold of hearing in here relative to the playback level of your system. And when I do that, the noise from all of these cables, if used as an interconnect, which we don't use an AC cable as an interconnect, is well below threshold of audibility. So both power cables are actually fully transparent if you change the termination and use them as an interconnect. They still would be totally silent on this thing. So, and that's why we don't hear this kind of thing routinely, right? You don't, people build good systems. They don't walk around bragging about how great their system is. But, oh, by the way, I hear all this hum and noise. It's like, no, you're not hearing that because our hearing threshold is very poor in that. And by the way, let me go back to his thing. All this noise, how come he doesn't hear him, right? This is his room, and you look at how much low frequency noise it has that goes way into 60 hertz, the domain that I was measuring. And this is silent to his ear because our hearing sucks in this region on that thing, okay? So that's that. So yes, there's the configuration, whatever weave he used created some kind of twisted pair thing. So it has a little bit of immunity, extra immunity. It still picked up noise, by the way. It's this blue here versus the red. So it wasn't like it didn't pick up anything. Then this notion of noise gets repeated over and over and over again, that these cables reducing noise, either reducing noise being fed into the power supply. He claims that the cable is acting as a filter. If the cable's acting as a filter, just measure its frequency response. If I design a low pass or high pass filter, it shows that. Just hook it up to AC mains and measure that, or artificial signal and show that, or just show ambient noise. I've measured the hopping A90's output, and I showed that it makes no difference whatsoever with his cable versus another cable. Why? Because even when I use products that do filter the incoming noise, I see zero difference on output of audio device. Why? Because the first thing an audio device does, it converts AC to DC, and that process of converting to DC, which means it never changes, requires filtering. And filtering at 10, 20, 30 volts, whatever the audio equipment requires, is far, far, far easier than filtering 120 volts or 240 volts. And at any rate, there is no filtering mechanism here whatsoever. There's nothing in there in this cable. It has no active components in there. There's no passive components. It's just wire. Wire doesn't do any filtering. It just carries the current on AC. Okay? Then the other claim, this is favorite of many. So improvements can't be measured. First, let's start with hey, isn't that convenient that you say can't be measured? Therefore, you start off with, oh, you can't ever disprove that my cable does anything. Interesting enough, Danny's main business is taking people's speakers and building crossover mods for it. And I shouldn't say main business, some of his business is that. But he never listens to it. He says, look, here's a measurement before and here's a measurement after. You all go build this mod. It's going to make your speaker sound better. Really? I mean, what if it doesn't? What if it screwed up the directivity? What if it increased distortion? You don't listen. You don't need to listen. You trust measurements so implicitly, so strongly. But when it comes to measuring noise in a cable, all of a sudden your measurements are no good. I just showed you noise measurement. It's just trivial to measure noise. And if you can't measure noise, then get out of noise reduction business on this thing. So he says, obviously, veils are removed and all this stuff. It's like, great. If veils are and all that removed, then it should be trivial to do that testing and prove first that there is an audible difference. If there's an audible difference, when bias has been removed, knowledge of which cable is being used removed, and statistically significant, then we can go back and find a measurement to see if measurements work or it doesn't work. And until then, my null test wins because it shows conclusively that there's nothing there. So we go back to this thing again of audible differences exist, so review must be wrong. It's like, great. You're selling me water as, that you say you put, gas tank, car makes it go twice as fast. And I say, prove that. You say, well, no, I'm just going to say it. And if you found out that that didn't work, then it's your problem. It's like, no, it's not my problem. You have to first show me that the audible difference reliably exists. And if you can't do that, then it's no good. And by the way, the test to do that is not to keep saying, Amir, you come over and listen. I'm not going to go to your place and listen. It's your job to run this business. And if you want to run a business properly, show proof points that your products do something. And the right solution to that isn't to say, I hear it with my own double-blind test that we can't verify. Bring a group of people, audiophiles. I'm sure that he has local audiophiles that even people who are his customers. Bring them in, bring half a dozen people in, and then run a randomized set of trials in there at least 10 times and see if 9 out of 10 times these people can even detect which cable's in use. No, I don't trust him running a test like that or somebody else going in there having to do it. There's so many ways to have a tell in these kinds of tests where you can listen for the sound of something or something moving or whoever's running it is not careful enough and leaves a way for the person like him that's sharp and smart and is looking for every opportunity to say there's a difference to find a tell in there. And so let's just remove all that and just have audiophiles out there with golden ears or otherwise. Bring them in, but run a completely blind test, controlled test, and repeat it many times. Don't just do it once or twice. And start with that. No cable company in the world has ever run this kind of test. Simple enough. Well, how long does it take? It takes less time to do this than to make that 40-minute video. Bring people in, and just run these things. Have them have a scorecard where they write down which cable's which, and just do it 10 times. 2 or 3 minutes each. 40 minutes, you're done. Show that proof to us. Don't make 40-minute videos just talking about stuff that doesn't exist. Okay. He then makes a claim that you can't run double-blind tests because the person switching the cables knows that he's switching the cables. To me, that's fine. Okay, we'll make an exception for you. Make sure whoever's doing that cable switching is not an audiophile, is not involved in any of this claims. You get a random person off the street, come in, maybe somebody works in your warehouse or whatever, and we tell him what to do and how he's supposed to do it so that it's behind the curtain and, nobody can tell. And I trust that as a first order approximation of the testing that we want to do. We could, of course, use a relay-based switching, but I'm sure he's going to say the relay changes the sound, so relay is no good. And at any rate, it's tricky. Relays make a different sound when they close versus when they open. So if you're smart, you can actually listen for that. So yeah, just use a person to switch cables and get it done. That's the video I like to see him do, not this kind of video. So to summarize this and keeping my video shorter than this, the testing I did was extremely comprehensive. It covered both measurements and also the sound with music, with 3 tracks, with the tracks actually provided to people to perform controlled double-blind tests. He said, oh, people listen to my the 2 sample files and say they sounded different. Yeah, I'm sure you actually said that in the review, that some people will listen to A and B and say they sound different. But put them behind a double-blind comparator and then run 10 times. Let's see if you can still hear a difference. That's what he didn't do. That's what those listeners have not done. I started with null tests. A whole bunch of his comments on his video, people backing him saying, oh, measurements are good, measurements are no good. Okay, well, I'll run a null test. It wasn't based on measurements. Measurements were, supporting cast on this thing. There are no proof points in the 40 minutes whatsoever. There's just nothing there from the company to back anything. Typically, when I do these tests, proper companies replicate the measurements, replicate the testing, and bring a different set of test results. When they do, Then I work with them, find out if I made a mistake, they made a mistake. Here is just making up stuff of how about this, how about that, see what sticks on this thing. No measurements are provided to countermine, no null tests are provided whatsoever. And key thing is this, every time somebody talks to you about this and that technical topic about cables, power cables or power products, remind them, look, my equipment is not amplifying AC. AC is converted to DC as a means to make electronics do what they do. And boy, if you get a crappy audio product that lets noise in for some reason, this power cable isn't going to help you because it does no filtering whatsoever of anything coming in. And if it did, you're going to spend $400 to improve some crappy piece of electronics. Chuck the crappy piece of electronics, buy hundreds of products that I recommend that are not crappy, and don't need any special cabling to perform what they do. And by the way, none of my expensive instruments come with any kind of fancy cables or benefit from this cable. You think Audio Precision with $28,000 instrument couldn't afford to put a $100 cable in there to make things better if it reduced noise, which is a key metric for an analyzer? They would. So, and then finally, let's say all these arguments are true. This cable is crap. Excuse my French, it's crap. You can't plug it in. It destroys your outlets. It can be unsafe. It is not, doesn't have safety regulations. I don't care what else it does. It is not a proper cable to use. Okay. Hopefully this was part entertaining and somewhat useful for you. I really wanted to do more technical topics, reviews, but here I am. Okay, see you in a future video. Bye-bye.